Welcome back to another episode of the ADHD Goals Podcast. I've got a very exciting guest for you today. His name is Mickey Kennedy. He is the founder of eReleases, which he founded over 25 years ago. And eReleases helps small businesses and startups and authors. They gain website traffic and better quality customers through media coverage. And Mickey also holds an MFA in creative writing and continues to write poetry most Monday nights in a virtual group of fellow misfits. But most importantly, his golden ticket onto the show today is because Mickey has ADHD. So welcome to the show, Mickey. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So I was just commenting on, before we started recording, that you have an interesting collection of fossils on your shelves behind you. If you're not watching one of the video versions of this, then you are missing out because it's a very vibrant backdrop with some very interesting fossils. Tell me about your interest in fossils.
I think that in a lot of ways, I'm still a big kid. I'm big into fossils, old comic books, things like that. So I've always loved fossils. I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, so we had a quarry nearby. So there was always lots of mostly shark's teeth and clams, fossilized clam shells and scallops and things like that, that were easily readable. You could find anywhere. Most people's driveways were full of them, just from the gravel and stuff like that. So I was always fascinated by it. I think a lot of people are. So I've been able to indulge it as I've gotten older.
I've taken my kids where did we go? Last year we went to a beach somewhere, and it will come back to me, but it was on the Jurassic Coast. So we were I think they were a bit excited at finding a fossil, but as per usual, you go digging and you don't find anything. So I found myself sort of inventing parts of dinosaurs that it could have been. I suppose if you've got the opportunity when you're young to discover these things, it rather sets in an interest for life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell us, we usually start with an insight into your background and your journey with ADHD. Tell us a bit about how long you've known you've had ADHD and how that has gone for you.
I didn't know I officially had ADHD, I guess, until about, I started suspecting it probably about 20 years ago. And I think that we were getting my daughter seen for some OCD when she was younger, about 12 or 14 years ago, around then. And so I just naturally said, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you as well. I think I have some issues." And sure enough, he's like, "Yeah, yeah, you have ADHD." So one of the things I've always known is caffeine doesn't work for me. Caffeine mellows me out. I can drink coffee, lay my head down and fall asleep. And he said that that's definitely, stimulants often calm you. That's why, they give you Adderall and things like that. And so that was another, it made me feel, yeah, definitely there's something different there where caffeine doesn't perk me up. So that was it. I've always been scatterbrained, I chalked it up to being, creative. I was a writer growing up and then went to graduate school for poetry. So I just felt like that's the way we artist types. And maybe that's still true, but I think that for me, getting diagnosed helped me realize a little bit of my limitations and what I should focus on and not focus on.
That is interesting, the way you said it helped you sort of discover some of your limitations. I found a similar thing when I discovered I had ADHD. I found that tended to overcompensate on the things that I couldn't do very well, i.e. sort of like planning and organizing. So I was fixated in my last job in finding solutions for organizing projects and, trying to become this organized person that I really wasn't. Um, and realizing that I was banging my head against a brick wall and having the diagnosis, understanding that I had ADHD, it allowed me to maybe step back and look at it slightly different and try and maybe focus my attention on areas that, I could excel at, and find different ways around those challenging, realizing that I would never necessarily become fluent in those activities. I could maybe find better ways to deal with them. Is that how you saw it too?
Yeah, I think that for me, having a business with multiple employees, it kind of, allowed me to say, hey, this is what my strength is, and hire people into my weaknesses and the stuff that doesn't interest me and that I'm not really good at. And so, actually, it sort of allows me to hone in on what my superpower is. And
Mm.
I think that a lot of people who have ADHD have really strong interests and can go really deep down a rabbit hole in those interests, and that can actually serve you really well. Uh, and if you can then compensate by having someone else to delegate the stuff that you're not good at and the stuff that sort of sidelines you or sidetracks you, or you're just never good at sort of following through with.
Yeah, I think that the ability to delegate, though, I've often found a challenge. I think um, I wasn't able to delegate very well because a certain amount of delegation requires you being organized enough to tell them what you need them to do, which I wasn't necessarily great at. But also, I think it's overcoming maybe a sense of shame that you can't do it yourself. Um, that can be quite tricky. So it takes a lot of learning to be able to be comfortable with delegating, I think.
Yeah, I think it is a skill set you kind of have to develop and learn. For me, I was always wanting everything perfect, so I found that I was a micromanager to my staff. Uh, I I didn't realize it myself. I had to bring in a professional to figure out why turnover was so bad. Most employees would leave after a year. I was never happy with how people performed, and I was part of a marketing mastermind for many years, and one of the people there said, "Hey, I can interview your staff, I can interview your customers, I can look at your job postings and figure out, why you're attracting the wrong people." And then at the end of it, she says, "You're not attracting the wrong people. You're just, an unbearable micromanager wanting everything perfect." And so, as a result, uh, I tried to take that information and learn from it, but I couldn't. I was still a micromanager, so I just got out of the office. I just worked from home, focusing on strategy, marketing, the things feel like I'm good at, education, talking to people like this on podcasts. I had someone in the office that was sort of senior to everyone else, and everybody looked up to her sort of as a maternal figure. So it was natural to sort of put her in charge. And, pretty much everybody that was there in 2015 when I left are still there. So I definitely was the problem. But at the end of the day, you just sort of have to recognize that if you hire the right people, you have to trust them, and, they're never going to do anything exactly the way you want it done. I mean, I was wanting the exact words that come out of their mouth through every customer interaction to be the words I would say. And that kind of heavily scripted stuff doesn't work. I mean, we hate it when we get on the phone with tech support and they're talking on scripts. And so it doesn't work with, customer facing conversations either. I just have to trust that, they're getting the information across that's important in their words. And, that's naturally what we just have to do.
Mm. Yeah, I've certainly found that challenge myself when I was working in a small agency. We depending, I suppose it's different at different size businesses, but if a small agency and you have a lot of responsibility yourself, and maybe you're not necessarily in the position to hire people that are more senior or somebody who's already well established, it can be easy to then sort of want the people that you're training to do it exactly how you want it done. But if you're such a small team that you still got to get stuff delivered, then there's a temptation to say, well, I'll just do it myself. And then they end up not learning anything at all. So it's a real challenge, I think. And I think with there's a certain saboteur that ADHD people can have, which is the stickler or the hyperachiever, and that can certainly end in perfectionism or wanting things done in a certain way. So tell me a little bit about how you started eReleases. I'm assuming that the challenges that you were just describing them was with your company eReleases. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So we provide press release distribution for small businesses, entrepreneurs, and authors and startups. Basically, we act sort of like as a co-op and are able to buy national distributions over PR Newswire for a substantial discount. For example, PR Newswire charges over $1,600 to move a 600-word press release, and through us, it's about a third of the price. So it's a really big cost savings, and you get access to the wire. In the U.S., there's two newswires of press releases. PR Newswire, which is the oldest and largest, and who we work with, and the other one's Business Wire. Outside of that, there's other companies who call themselves wires, but they're mostly involved in syndication and don't reach journalists. But journalists really when they look for stories, they fish in these two ponds of Business Wire as well as PR Newswire. There are other types of wire services, many of which you've probably heard of: Associated Press, AP, United Press International, UPI, Reuters, and places like that. They don't move press releases over their system. They write articles, and then newspapers and other places license those articles. So rather than the Baltimore Sun writing every breaking story, they can just pull that story off of the Associated Press, and they either have a licensing arrangement or pay a fee for that.
So are you predominantly US based, or do you do global press releases at all?
So we do offer distribution in English to other countries, but we're predominantly U.S. Centric, and or people looking to reach the U.S. market.
Mm. I don't know if you get asked this more recently, but how's the onset of AI is that having an effect on the PR industry at all?
I think it definitely affects the writing, less so of the distribution, because you can't really replace that. The email isn't really effective reaching a lot of journalists anymore because of media databases. They're available for as little as like $5,000 to $8,000 and up, and so you get a golf club manufacturer who gets the access to this database, and they realize there's like 2,800 journalists interested in golf products. And then they start talking themselves into, hey, let's send it to banking and business journalists, because, bankers and business people buy golf clubs, but they don't realize that, a financial analyst who reports on publicly traded companies is never going to write an article on golf clubs. So a lot of inboxes are just overflowing with off-targeted spam because of these databases. And so it makes it more important to move over a newswire where journalists are actually looking. And I know that because there's only two newswires that reach the majority of journalists, they are expensive. And there have been efforts to try and infiltrate that and create a third. But the problem is that if you have a third pond for journalists to go, it's another thing they have to do. And at the same time, the news world isn't doing very great. So these journalists are expected to do more with less. And so the idea of them having to then go to a third place, it eats up too much of their time. So they're just not willing to indulge that. And there was a company trying to make an inroad there, and they just didn't. So they sort of pivoted and said, hey, if you're a publicly traded company that wants to meet SEC disclosure. We do that. And the great news is a lot of journalists don't really pay attention to us. So you won't have a journalist pouring through your numbers and trying to find mistakes and other things. So uh, a lot of publicly traded companies are like, yeah, we like that. We really don't want journalists writing a lot of articles. We mostly want our press releases to show up, in the financial indices. Like when you go to Yahoo Finance or Market Watch and type in a stock ticker, we want to make sure our press release appears there. But we really don't care about journalists looking too carefully into what we're doing.
Mm. And it said, at the beginning, we just said that, eReleases focuses on small businesses, startups, and authors. So it occurs to me that, obviously helping smaller businesses, entrepreneurs essentially, or people, authors, people in that creative industry. Um, how did you arrive at that decision to help specifically those people? And I'm thinking through the lens of, people with ADHD tend to find themselves either, working for themselves or, becoming an entrepreneur or being in that creative industry. So I wonder, was there any of that decision making when you started eReleases?
So I worked for a startup as employee number three, I guess around 27 years ago, and that was sort of what exposed me to press releases. And I was sending them out, and they weren't doing very well. And so I really made it my mission to figure out what I was doing wrong, and I got really good at it. And we were getting lots of media pickup. I remember the first release that I did with my new model of following a story arc, and rather than just publishing data, but really share the story behind some of the data. Um, we got picked up by the Financial Times, The Economist, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and three telecom trade publications that one release. And so I felt like, wow, I kind of think I figured this out. And so I just felt like I could help other small businesses do this. At the time, there weren't a lot of people out there helping small businesses. Most PR firms started at like $20,000 a year and up. And so I just really felt like this is something I could do. And I did it myself initially, mostly with a Rolodex of journalists that I sort of cultivated. And eventually, PR Newswire reached out to us, said, "We like what you're doing. We'd love to support you some way." And they had suggested a reduced price city or state distribution, and I really told them that I felt that you know I really wanted a national distribution for my clients, and we continued to talk, and eventually we were able to work it out. I met them, and one of the things I noticed is they have an overnight editorial team that they said really doesn't do much. They're there if there's breaking news or a recall, or they need to get something out to the Asian markets, and so they can coordinate with the Asian news bureaus. But largely, they just sit there for hours idle. And I was just like, hey, I could start setting up my releases for next business day by default. And that way you could set up releases overnight and it wouldn't cost you additional labor. And so that was one of the ways in which I made it a win-win for both of us. And they were able to finally accommodate us.
Mm. And I wonder, when you made that transition from working within a startup to figuring out, oh, I could do this sort of thing myself. Um, if my maths is correct, then that would still be before you realized you had ADHD. So what challenges did you face making that transition to setting up a company yourself?
I think for me, I love newness and learning. And so the beginning of the whole experience was great. And then when you got into the daily grind of it, I really felt that and it was miserable. And I wanted to hire an employee, but I was still really cautious and afraid because I was just like, what if we have a bad month or two? Then it's like, how do I pay people? And so I really waited until the business was doing much better before I brought on employee number one. I tell people I probably should have been bringing on employee number three at that time. But eventually I did. And it definitely freed me up and, took some of the pressure off, and allowed me to sort of still focus more on the bigger picture and strategy while still keeping an eye on the day to day.
Mm. It's yeah, I mean, it's interesting how you uh, highlighted there that the newness of starting a new business is really appealing. I often find that whenever I'm doing workshops in my old job when I was doing workshops with clients, I just love the fact that ideas were happening and things were just starting, and it being there at the start of something is really quite interesting. But as soon as a project drags on, and we talked about perfectionism. If it doesn't feel like it's going to be exactly how you want it, then then the enthusiasm can really drop and wane. So I wonder, how do you're 25 years plus in, how do you maintain that novelty or excitement in what you're doing?
Pay attention to what other people out there in the market are doing. Things have evolved and changed. I also sort of look at how other mediums are using press releases. Like I noticed that there's a TikToker called Snackalator who does a weekly roundup of snacks hitting grocery store shelves, and he relies on press releases and the photos from press releases and things like that. So, um, um, it's really exciting to see these other mediums using press releases and getting access to the wire, because over 15 years ago, the wire was really, really, I don't know, snobbish, and they really didn't want to accept bloggers as journalists, and they reluctantly finally did, and it's just refreshing to see them giving journalists access to the wire, to Instagram influencers in the fashion world, and people like the Snackalator on TikTok and places like that. So I just sort of I'm always sort of looking at what's going on in the world of news and media, because it is evolving and changing, and I want to make sure that I stay on top of it and continue to change and embrace that as well.
I was wondering how things might have changed in the PR world since the onset of, I suppose you mentioned blogging, but I was thinking more of social media. But um, I suppose, would you say that, because it's talked about a lot how the traditional news world or news publishing world has been affected by having to sort of accept that social media is here and sort of adapt. I suppose PR being the sort of marketing version of that. Um, how how to embrace that mix is a challenge, I suppose.
It is. I think that for me, I just at the end of the day, I want to sort of help small businesses. I want to help them, better communicate and take advantage of media opportunities. A big change that I've seen in the marketplace is all of this paid placement, where for a fee you can get on a subdomain of USA Today or Forbes, and they don't call it sponsored content, but they call it something else that's very similar, and it's just it doesn't pass my ethical test. I always tell people that you can do that, but it just I know in my marketing world of other marketers I talk to, they always say, "Oh, whenever we see a Forbes article that someone's in, we just our eyes go, yeah, yeah, you paid a couple $1,000 and that was it." And that just sort of tells me that Forbes doesn't matter as much as it used to, because you can just pay and get online. The thing is that you'll never be in print by paying. I haven't seen any evidence that they're doing paid placement in the actual print publication, but for online, they are. And a lot of these paid placements, when you go to their main website and do a search for yourself, you won't even show up, because you're not really part of their main content management system. You're not really their news. You're just a subset of usually a subdomain or a folder where they just sort of delegate this additional content. And it is, I feel unfortunate, because I think that for the money people spend on this, they could really be doing real PR campaigns and get real earned media and real opportunities to get picked up because uh, the Forbes article might look good and you can put it out there to people, but you're not going to get natural traffic from it. You're not going to get like readers of Forbes discovering it because it's not discoverable on
Mm,
Forbes.
mm,
And so, again, it sort of defeats the true purpose of what earned media is. I mentioned when we got picked up at that telecom research company, uh, we would get calls, we would get orders, we would get inquiries, and it drove a huge amount of business our way. One of the things that we later noticed with our data is that there's usually a jump in telecom traffic in emerging countries that's followed usually 2 to 4 years later with economic growth, double digit economic growth. And when we published that data, all of a sudden we started getting orders from not telecom companies, which pretty much all of our orders were telecom companies and telecom analysts. And all of a sudden we were getting orders from hedge funds and investment firms. And, they're paying, a lot of money to get these reports. And so it really opened us up to a whole new audience. Those are the opportunities you get with real earned media that, paid placement will never give you.
mm. Um, I wonder, with thinking about our audience, and like I was saying before, that potentially a lot of people with ADHD are entrepreneurs, um, and or creatives, and I'm thinking of authors specifically. Um, if they were thinking, "Oh, this sounds good. I could do with some PR." Uh, how would you describe what it's like to start working with you? How do you integrate yourself with the business in order to truly sort of reflect what they're about in order to give some great PR?
Right. So one of the first things I do is I recommend that people go through a video masterclass that I have. It's about an hour long. And it's at ereleases.com/plan, PLAN. It's completely free. And I know that, the last 20-hour course I bought, I never completed. So I tried to make it as short as possible. So an hour commitment. But it'll really go through the types of releases that get media pickup and develop into earned media. One of the biggest criticisms of press releases is that they don't work. And probably 97% of them don't work. But, moving more than 10,000 releases a year, I get to see the releases that do work. And I notice that a lot of them have patterns. And I've been able to take those patterns and have other customers try them and they get successes. So if you build a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases and they're all following these strategic types of releases, you'll probably get 2 or 3 of those to get earned media. And, that's doesn't seem like a lot, but it potentially is because if you do 6 to 8 releases with me, with our new customer rate coming in and buy a package, you can accomplish this for under, $3,500. And so uh, if you get 2 releases that get you earned media, maybe one gets 4 articles, maybe one gets 6 articles, you got 10 articles for under $3,500. That's, if you did the paid placement, you would have spent close to $20,000 for the equivalent amount of articles. And again, they wouldn't be natural articles. They wouldn't bring you organic traffic. They wouldn't bring you, real legitimacy and experiences of earned media. So it definitely is, I feel like a really cost effective way to approach it by doing these strategic releases. And I have one, that approach in that strategic release education that every customer that has used it has gotten on average 8 to 14 articles. The least we've ever had anyone get is 4. We've
Mm,
never had anybody try it and get 0. And that's to do a survey within your industry. And, it sounds like a big ask, but use Survey Monkey, 12 questions that are meaningful, 4 questions per page, and then take that link and send it to a small or independent trade association in your industry and do a little research. They're out there. The big trade associations don't partner with people like this. They're not very open to things like this. They have their own media departments. The small and independent trade associations, not a lot of people know about them, which is why this is a win-win for them. You can approach them and say, "Hey, would you be willing to send this link out to your members? I'm looking for at least 100 responses. In exchange for doing this, I will mention you in a press release. I'll be issuing a repair newswire with the results from the survey." And most 2/3 of the time, the first one you approach will say yes. I've had a couple come back and say, "Could we get a little more prominence, like maybe co-brand the survey?" And as long as they don't start determining what you can say, what question, unless they want to get involved in editing the questions and all of that, I find there's no problem with giving them credit, more credit. It actually probably legitimizes the survey a little bit more. And then you're going to look at the responses from that survey and figure out what was the biggest surprise there. And you're going to take all the questions and answers, and you're going to build out a page on your website with all of that questions and answers there. But the press release is really going to focus on probably one, at most two of the questions. And so you're going to want to pick the one that you feel is going to shock or interest that industry the most, and the audiences that read these articles. And you're going to provide some analysis and a quote as to why you felt the numbers skewed a particular way. You're the expert. You're standing out within your industry as sort of an analyst here, and then you send that out. And like I said, the average is 8 to 14 articles when someone does this, and it really works. The secret is you just want to pick meaningful questions. Like if you were going to a conference or a trade show, what are the questions you'd want to ask someone there? The reason that we love to talk at trade shows is we often get to ask the questions that have been in the back of our mind, but we haven't seen them answered out there in the newspapers that we read that talk about our industry, or the trade publications that talk about our industry. And often those types of questions are ripe for asking in a survey like this and seeing if the results are intriguing. And that way you can then really just take advantage of that. And the media will recognize, hey, this is something we haven't really talked about, but it's probably of interest to a lot of people in the industry. And so, I get excited about this because I really feel that, doing strategic releases and releases that are, unlike the types that most people do, can really move the needle for a lot of people.
No, I certainly, I used to be a UX designer and do UX research. So it's sort of ticking a lot of boxes or pushing a lot of buttons for me when I think about it. So just to clarify then, so when you say you send out these questionnaires, is that eReleases approaching the client
No, I just provide the education, and
yeah.
it's the actual customer sending that out to the survey, sending it out to a trade association they've gone and found that represents their industry, and they're sort of handling it.
Yeah, so who you're working with, you recommend that they send out the questionnaire to their industry, and so essentially that's a B2B questionnaire. They're sending it out to other businesses rather
Yes.
than yeah.
Yes. So, but it is the type of things that often interest consumers as well. So, if you are a candy manufacturer and you've done a survey of other candy companies about, say trends or in the candy space, or uh, you know, things that are just affecting the industry, people like to know what the results are. Like,
Mm,
hey, you know, uh, based on a survey of over 100 candy makers, we've determined a trend that we believe that these are going to be the next hot candies over the next couple of years. And so people will find that fascinating, as well as people within the industry.
mhm. I've got here in my notes, speaking about staying on strategic processes. I've got here a note to say that how you adapted split testing from landing pages and applied those to business processes. And I suppose for the listeners who don't know, who are not familiar with the term split testing, maybe if you could just explain what that is and then
Sure.
how you applied it.
So, when you are advertising, uh, you generally don't send people to your homepage. You usually send them to a page designed to bring them in and convert them. It could convert them to sign up for something free, like get their email address, or it could be converting them to actually buying something with you. But it's a measurable conversion rate. And usually after a certain number of orders or conversions of people giving you their email address, you have a track record of how that page converts. And so an A B split test is then duplicating that page and then sending half of the traffic from that paid ad to that page and the other half to a new page where everything is the same except usually one element, usually a headline, could be a subhead, could be an image. And you just sort of switch out one element at a time and you pick the winner after you have enough conversions for statistical relevance. With paid, it's usually like at least 50 conversions of the losing page. Uh, but for email signups, it might be a little bit more. But the more you get, the more statistically relevant it is. And so once you've determined winners, you keep refining your best page and testing other options to compete against it. A lot of times you can hypothesize things that you think will be better, and sometimes they're not, but sometimes they are. And by making little changes like this, incremental changes over time, 2 years later, you can have a page that's converting 30, 40% better than the page you started with 2 years previously. And I was really fascinated by this concept that I learned in marketing. And one of the things that I realized is that you can take the same approach and do it outside of the marketing world. I looked at how we were onboarding new customers, and we had some suggestions among the staff as to ways in which we could improve it. So we would take like half the population would get the standard onboarding, and then the other half would get a slightly different one, or one change in that path. And then we would look at the results of uh, the lifetime value of that population. And so, 6 months we would, have the split between the two. And then we'd measure at the end of the year, are these two populations the same with lifetime value, or is there a really big difference? And at 2 years, is there a big difference? And, one of the things that I used to do is I learned this in the marketing world, this shock and awe package. So when a new customer came on board, we sent them this package of love. And it had a book in it, a welcome letter, but it also had a lot of fun stuff. We're from the Baltimore, Maryland area. So we had like Old Bay seasoned chips. We had a little action figure of Edgar Allan Poe with a raven, and it talked and said "Nevermore." This little, fun little things, and like it was full of confetti and you know fun colors, and it was just I thought it was great.
Mm.
And I had one person say that they thought it was unprofessional. And I was spending $60 of stuff here. And I was just like, rather than get offended, maybe because I'm not a business person, I immediately don't get offended by stuff like that. I go,
Mm.
man, maybe they're right. Maybe we should test it. And so
Mm.
I did that. And what I got as a result of it was, um, you know, they were right. We For 6 months we onboarded with the shock and awe package, and the other half just got the book and the welcome letter, and
Mhm.
that was buried in the box. But in this case, it was just sending that out. There's also a $50 price difference, and so
Yeah.
at the end of a year, the people who got the book and letter, their lifetime value was, I think, almost double what the population who got the shock and awe package was. And at 2 years, I think it was like triple. And so I was just like, yeah, that person was right for whatever reason. When people do business with a press release company, they want a professional image, not a lot of silliness in a box. And so, you know, I've tested other little things like that, like, following up with leads with suggestions for headlines and, ideas for press releases and stuff like that. And some work and some don't. But it's just, if you have a process of doing something in your business, and you're not sure if it's helping or hurting, you can always test it and
Mm,
try two different approaches. The thing is, you just have to measure and identify that person going forward in your CRM. Or content management system or a customer management system, and be able to determine if it is affecting conversions and lifetime value.
mm. I mean, you've said within that, you sort of said one of my favorite phrases that I used to use when I was a UX designer is because it's quite easy to with something like design, it's quite easy for the client or the person that you're doing the job for to see what they see in a oh, subjective way, uh, or and they'll want to say, "Oh, I don't like that," and you can get really sort of offended by that if you're the designer and you've actually put a lot of effort into it. But I'm trying to bring things back to ADHD, but certainly the sense of rejection that you might get from that is crazy. But to have that one phrase of, "Oh, we should test that," it really removes any of that. Taking it personally. If somebody, you don't have to take it as a criticism. We say that's a good idea. Let's test that, and then really you're creating this crazy science lab of saving money essentially. um the fact that you can feel like you're doing experiments and you'll see which one works, and in the end, nobody takes it personally. It's like, all right, we've won here because we've ultimately we've saved money or gone with the right option. But yeah, it's incredibly incredibly powerful. And I like the fact that you've applied that to very different processes. I think that's really useful, because it's very easy to also find yourself in another scenario where we used to call them hippos, the highest paid person in the room. That doesn't really work out, but it did.
Right.
Yeah, and essentially, what they say goes, but if you know that they might be wrong, then you have to have a way to push back and say, well, let's test it. And at the end of the day, if they are sort of in charge, the business owner or manager, they ultimately they're going to want to either make more money or save money. So they will end up listening to that concept of testing it.
Yeah. Every time I talk to marketing or business podcasts and talk about how I just, rather than get mad when someone said, I think this is unprofessional, I just tested it. And they're like,
Mm,
well, I don't understand why you would do that, because most people would be like, oh, this person doesn't know what they're talking. And I said, I think maybe because I came to business as a poet. And so I don't have like, a business degree and things like that. So I just sort of approach it logically and just say, hey, this is what I've learned in my marketing masterminds, and, test everything. And if this is something we can test and I feel like it's worth testing, because every time a customer says something, I don't say, let's set up a test. But sometimes when it's really meaningful, it really does get me thinking. And so I am willing to do it. And, the same thing with walking away from the business. People are like, a lot of people wouldn't have done that. They would just say, oh, I'm not a micromanager. And just, and I'm just like, well, I'm not the expert. And, this human resources person is, and I trusted her. And so when she came back with that analysis, I immediately identified with it when she told me about it and said, yeah, I could see that if every time I'm talking to one of my employees, it's an improvement and something that they're not doing right, that they could feel like it's constantly like me chipping away at them. And that was never my intention. My intention was to get them better and to lead them,
Mm.
down a more, uh, you know, path that's just polished like I would want it. And, what I needed to do was to be a cheerleader and provide support and recognize when they're doing really well and recognize that they're doing good enough when it comes to their conversations. They're conveying everything that needs to be conveyed to the customer. And it's not in my exact words. And it's kind of like really, a, a, a dark, evil person almost that would expect that everybody's going to talk exactly the way you are. And I recognize the absurdity of it now, removed 9 years from it. But at the time, I just said, well, this person is an expert. I'm the problem and I can't stop myself. I mean, that day she told me, I said, I'm going to change. And then I found myself after someone got off the phone, standing right behind her in her cubicle and saying, hey, next time someone says this, you should say it like this. And I just thought to myself, I'm probably not going to be able to break away from this
Mm.
behavior. So I just need to get out of the office. And I was fortunate enough that I could get away from the office. I recognize that some people may not be able to, that they have to be micromanagers and still be in that environment. And I don't know how I would have solved that. But for me, I took the easy route out because I didn't need to be there day to day.
Mm. Well, I think the way that you came on to sort of that element of changing behavior, and certainly with ADHD, when I uh, with my ADHD clients, coaching clients, um, we quite often look at some of the challenges that they're having and try and design solutions for that, either looking at what their strengths are or identifying what their saboteurs are, and try and come up with design a solution that will help them overcome that challenge. But coming back to the testing as well, it's it quite often requires, because you can quite easily just like read what you read online and somebody says this will help you do this, and that might be a neurotypical person saying that, and it doesn't really apply to someone with ADHD, and with ADHD we've got that novelty element. So one solution for a challenge right now might work, but ultimately over a period of time that novelty wears off and then the challenge comes back, and you've got to essentially keep doing those A/B tests for life, and finding solutions that, tweaking and optimizing solutions to overcome those ADHD challenges. And I wonder if you may be able to share with the listeners any specific hacks or tips that you yourself have come up with that helps you overcome your ADHD. You mentioned there was the nuclear option of stepping away from the office because
Right.
you couldn't overcome the micromanaging. But have you found any other ways that you've been able to change behavior slightly?
Yeah, I think that there are there's actual Zooms that you can get on of other people with ADHD, and you can keep your camera on or off, but it's like pockets of time where you want to get something accomplished, and just having the sense that someone else is there keeps you on task. And it is funny, it works. And I haven't done it recently, but I've looked online and there's several of them, and looks like there's always one going. And it's really strange, but it is this sense that if someone else is there, that you can't slack off and go down rabbit holes. Your time is being held accountable. Another thing that I do is I do this to-do list where I put my important stuff at the top that has to get done, and then I will pepper it next with something that's really easy and simple. And I don't expect that I'm going to get everything done that day. Um, I just sort of let my natural rhythm go and try to accomplish as much as I can. And I do little pockets where I'll work, very productive. I know there's people who have these little timers and they do 15 minutes. I think it's Pomodo or something like that. But
Pomodoro, yeah.
Pomodoro, that's it.
Mm.
And I've heard about it. I've never done it, but I kind of feel like I'm sort of doing an organic, natural version of it. I don't like being held by a clock or a timer, so
Mm,
I just sort of will work in little bursts and then get up and walk around and you know, grab a cup of coffee and maybe reply to some emails, go to a news site, lose 45 minutes. And then I'll come back and go, okay, I'm ready to start. And I'll go back to my to-do list and just start running down it. And I find that that works for me. And you know, I guess it depends on how regimented you are, whether the traditional 15-minute thing would work. But I find that for me, that's something that I do. Another thing is I do try to keep it organized. I probably like you overcompensate my organizational skills because I recognize that if I have things that are organized, I don't feel as overwhelmed, and I feel more um, pressure, but more um, it feels more natural to then want to get things done and to
mm,
stay organized and to stay on track.
mm. Um, just to say that for anybody listening, what you were describing first was body doubling. I think it's called. That's the being online with people in order to sort of force yourself to get things done. Because I think back to there's definitely times where I'm trying to do things that I know are challenging, or maybe that I don't really want to do, but I need to get it done. And I'm up and down, going making cups of tea, going to the toilet because I've had too many cups of tea, picking up the guitar, this sort of thing. And if you feel that you're being watched, well, I don't want to make it sound peculiar, but if you feel that somebody's going to be distracted by that, then it does actually help to uh, focus you. Um, so yeah, body doubling, you can check that out for some if you can find them. I just want to make sure that we cover one of the things I mentioned at the top, and you just mentioned it a few minutes ago, the poetry side of you. So that fits into the creative side of your ADHD. And yeah, what can you tell us about you and your poetry, and how does
So,
that help you?
right. So, I really didn't get I really took off 20 plus years of poetry. After I finished my degree, I went into the telecom world and then pivoted to PR, and I just focused on building the business. And then I guess shortly after 2015, when I left the day-to-day operations, I fell back into the poetry again. Um, and started to make time for it in my life. It wasn't a lot of time initially, just a couple of, probably like 5 hours a week, usually a Monday night with a group. And we would do some writing before and after that. And I continued that for a few years. And then about 2.5 years ago, I really sat down and started to work on editing and honing my editing skills. And I'm really good at producing content. At the time, I think I had like 12 notebooks of stuff I'd written. But I had to go through it and figure out what was worth keeping, what I could evolve into a real finished poem. And, and then, now I've finished two manuscripts. I've had the first manuscript picked up by Black Lawrence Press for publication. Gosh, it's a long time off. It's February of 2026, so I think it's like you know almost 18 months. And then the second book, I'm still shopping a publisher for it, but um, it I feel accomplished now, and I feel better balanced because I'm able to have the business stuff that I'm focusing on and able to do the creative stuff, and I just feel more in harmony with the world because of the poetry, and I definitely feel like it more feeds my soul, and it is a more satisfying thing for me. I still get satisfied by helping small businesses with PR, but for me personally, the writing of poetry and all of that is just really, really great, and it really makes me feel um, enriched and
Mhm.
rewarded in a way that, money and business success doesn't.
Mm. No, I have a similar, being, I would say, sort of a creative, or feel like I lean towards that artist element. When you're sort of working in a small company, or starting a business, you feel that you have to keep focusing on that until it's working, or you might have a large responsibility of other people's um income as well, by keeping the business afloat. And that can with somebody with ADHD, that can really take over as like a hyper focus. And you can be so tunnel visioned that everything else in your life seems to just fall away. And particularly something, like taking the time to write some poetry, or draw, or whatever it may be, can seem, you and when you're in the white heat of starting a business, you can really like say, no, I'm not going to sit down and spend 2 hours doing that, because I've got, an endless list of work that needs to be done. But it can really wear you down after a long time. I feel that, I have so much information going in, but nothing ever coming out, that my brain just keeps getting clogged up. I wonder, you said about the editing, you finding it easy to produce stuff, but more challenging to edit. I wonder if you ever used your A/B testing uh, uh, skills, and did you ever perform them live, or get feedback from people in order to see how well people responded to them? Did that help?
Well, I can tell you the biggest A/B split test is where I've been picked up. So when I was writing just freely and sending it out to be published,
Uh-huh.
uh, I never got picked up at great places. I got picked
Mm,
up at a lot of okay places. And then once I started, revising my poems considerably, and, getting it out there to, the same places I was sending it to, all of a sudden, I've been picked up by Poetry Magazine, which is considered like the best poetry journal for poetry. I've been picked up by a lot of major publications like, Black Warrior Review, the Southern Review, Copper Nickel, won an award with Nimrod, Colorado Review. None of these places picked up any of the stuff that I wrote previously, and I did send to all of them.
mhm,
And so, that's telling me that the world out there wants, or at least the literary poetry journal world wants a finished poem, not something that is just needs to be pruned and sculpted and, massaged to be its best representation of a poem. And so, I think for me, that's the biggest split test that told me that, yeah, if you work on a poem and refine it and get it better, and you take it from basically a free write and transform it, it is a higher form of art. It is more polished. People appreciate it. People resonate with it. Where before it's kind of amateurish a little bit, and I think that's sort of like been my split test.
mm. And I'm interested to know, you mentioned obviously the Monday night group that you work with when you're writing poetry. How does that work? I mean, are you writing together? Are you talking about poetry? What's actually happening in those groups?
Right. So it's the same group that I started shortly after uh, yeah, April of 2015 when I left the day-to-day operations. And surprisingly, a few of the members are people that I worked with in a poetry workshop, like over 25 years ago. So it, it we used to write in person before the pandemic, and we would start with like an hour of free write beforehand. And then we'd usually have a poem that we've, done before and given copies to everyone. But during the pandemic, we moved to Zoom, and it's a lot more convenient because people are all over the place. So we've just stuck with that. And we really don't do the free write anymore. We just sort of expect that you're going to do it on your own time. And so what we do is we just share copies of poems before our meeting, and then we talk about them, discuss them, maybe make suggestions or just give some appreciation.
Mm. So I'm guessing when you say free write, is that a bit like in the artist way where you might do your morning pages? Were you like before the session just seeing what comes out?
Yeah, it's just talking. We do have usually prompts that are available, but you don't have to write to the prompt.
Uh-huh.
But some people need a prompt to sort of have something to write towards. But yeah, it's pretty much just writing. It, could be the start of a poem, could just be words on a page. But a lot of people just sort of take that opportunity to sort of write a poem that they've thought about, or a poem towards a prompt.
Uh-huh. And where for those of our listeners that are wanting to hear any of your poetry, where might we be able to find where does your poetry exist?
Right.
On
So I think if you type in my name, Mickey Kennedy Poetry, it'll show up in places. I do have a personal poetry website where some of it is linked, mickeykennedy.com. But yeah, and I'm on social media as well. So if you go to the mickeykennedy.com, you'll find my social media there.
Excellent. Okay. I mean, I wasn't going to go. Well, I didn't want to put you on the spot and say, "Can you read us some out?" But I mean, you're welcome to if you wanted to. But,
Sure, I could find something real quick. Let's see here.
I mean, I think my level of poetry is probably completely rhyming, uh, limerick style.
Sure, sure. So, this one is, blue collar,
Hmm.
um, and it's, about my father. I think he died when I was 9. He was an electrician, and he also owned the convenience store that my mother ran during the day, and he'd take over in the evenings. Blue collar. When I asked how electricity worked, Dad bent down from the cash register to explain the red and black, the positive and negative, the shiny copper of the ground. Every few months, he sliced open his hand, stripping wire. Maybe when you're older, he said, I'll teach you. When he sent me to the back to restock the drink coolers, I pressed my face against the glass, so cold it stung my lips. Later that day, the scrape of my mop against concrete, the endless rinsing of dirty water. The mop head was older than I was. With every swipe, it shed strips of cloth. I crawled on my knees to pick them up to save my dad from bending. Shop closed, windows dark. We shared a Coke out front. I watched the mound of his throat rise and fall as he swallowed. The parking lot was gravel, crushed small and packed. His dream, blacktop so smooth we could skate. He walked his fingers across my head, pretending.
Wow, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
Well done. I want to give you a round of applause.
Mhm.
Wow, I think that's a great note to end the show on. Thank you very much for doing that.
Sure.
Um, and just to remind the listeners where we can find you and e-releases.
Yep, eReleases.com. The free video masterclass is at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And again, you can catch my personal poetry website at mickeykennedy.com.
Fantastic. Well, it's been great having you on the show, and I wish you all the best for both of those, your poetry and e-releases. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye. Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.